All right, so I promised you
There's
one from before last break. Let's go here. This is With No Apologies, the personal and political memoirs of United States Senator Barry M. Goldwater, water, or as I like to call him, AUH2O. Get it? Goldwater? You gotta be a nerd to laugh at that. All right, so three people laughed. Good job. All right, so let's not go to the money shot first. Let's go here. The non-elected president is the chapter I am looking for. Let's finagle the book cam so we can get it on screen. All right. This is chapter 32, the non-elected president. I'm reading one paragraph and then we're moving on to the next chapter. This is just tying in what we just talked about. Public opinion, influenced, if not controlled by the mass media, called three strikes on Jerry Ford. Doesn't he have an aircraft carrier going to this thing right now, Tony? I think he does.
the largest
Right?
in the American naval fleet.
They got big boats going over there. They're not bringing party
Mhm.
toys. All right, so the Jerry Ford,
The
before he
largest in the
came to the plate,
Mediterranean. Yeah.
he was the first non-elected president. He was also on the Warren Commission. He played ball and he got rewarded. He was asked to lead an administration
That's
which
right.
had been paralyzed by Watergate for almost 2 years. Then he chose as the second non-elected vice president, former governor Nellie Rock of New York. This guy right here. This is why this guy hangs here. I wish I could have bought the rope, but he died with his head between the secretary's legs. Now let's go to the next clip. This is from the next chapter. It's called chapter 33, the non-elected rulers. Did you know we had some of these, Tony? This is a former United States senator. This is not conspiracy theory. This is not anti-Semitism. This is just some dude who worked in the
Okay.
Senate. He ran for president. Trying to
Going
get
back the whole way to Paris 1919, it's not like we talked about the Versailles Treaty last week at all,
we
huh?
did. We did. We
That's
did. So
curious. Just
so here we go.
saying.
Until the First War, we were successful in remaining aloof from Europe's quarrels. In the community of nations, we were more often debtor than creditor. Our population expanded. Our economic power increased. Under the free enterprise system, industry exploded. Power increased under the free I'm sorry. After World War One, I could I after World War One, we could no longer remain isolationists. The changing times required us to become a participant in the world community of nations. Scholars turned their attention to foreign affairs. What was to become the American Council on Foreign Relations was organized in Paris 1919 under the sponsorship of Colonel E.M. House, who had exerted much power in the Wilson administration. Now we get down to the next paragraph. In its September 1961 issue, the Christian Science Monitor described the Council on Foreign Relations, quote, as probably one of the most influential semi-public organizations in the field of foreign policy, end quote. The Monitor said, quote, the CFR is composed of 1,400 of the most elite names in world government, in the world of government, labor, business, finance, communication, and foundations, and the academies. It has staffed almost every key position in of every administration since that of FDR. That's interesting, but wait, there's
I mean,
more.
that's before the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab's proclamation
Yeah,
of
because people want to
infiltrating
know who
cabinets.
they
They were well
are,
ahead of that.
and stuff. Okay, this is page 278
Right.
with no apologies. The personal and political memoirs of Senator Barry Goldwater. The Rockefeller Foundation agreed to finance the operation of this plan. From that day forward, the Council on Foreign Relations has placed its members in policymaking positions in the federal government, not limited to the State Department, which is where the British first got their stronghold. That was my parenthetical. End of the State Department, if you're reading along. Since 1944, every American Secretary of State, with the exception of James F. Burns, has been a member of the CFR. They missed one, Tony. They're not perfect. Almost without exception, the members of the CFR are united by a congeniality of birth, economic status, and educational background. A number of writers disturbed by the influential role this organization has played during in the determining of foreign policy have concluded the Council on Foreign Relations and its members are an active part of a communist conspiracy for world domination. Not my words, Barry Goldwater, U.S. Senator. But as Ron Popeil says, wait, there's more. Over here we got Kissinger. So Kissinger is the protege of Nelson.
Zippy.
Zabinyu is the protege of
Yeah.
David, right? Right here. He's telling you
Mm-hmm.
these are the twin towers in our country of finance and control and power and king
A
making. Because
political
the CFR,
statecraft. Yeah.
dude, they one's Republican, one's Democrat. Like, they're covering a wide spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
They're the vice grips, right?
Yeah.
So if you go to the next one, it's more David
National Security
Rockefeller,
Advisor with
Trilateral
Brzezinski.
Commission. He's telling you all the good stuff. Then he gets over here, page 281. J.P. Morgan, Warburgs, Schiff, Lehman, Rockefeller, control vast wealth. And then he keeps going on to tell you how the world is working. One page more. Woodrow Wilson, Colonel E.M. Howe. So he's going through the history. The powerful European banker Anselm Rothschild once said, "Give me the power to issue a nation's money. Then I do not care who makes the laws." You see that? That's a U.S. senator writing that. Did they teach you this in school? Because you might have got short shrift.
Famous quote.
This is the quote. This is Barry Goldwater, page 284, chapter 33, the non-elected rulers. In my view, now he's not talking about the CFR, he's talking about the Trilateral Commission, but they're both Rockefeller projects, okay? In my view, the Trilateral Commission represents a skillful, coordinated effort to seize control and consolidate the four centers of power: political, monetary, intellectual, and ecclesiastical. All this is to be done in the interest of creating a more peaceful, more productive world community. Throughout my public life and in these pages, I have refrained from judging other men's motives. I have no such hesitancy about judging their wisdom and the results of the actions taken. Then he talks about socialized plan, because he already said it's like a big communist takeover of the country. Then he gets to Jimmy Carter and how they bring him in, because Jimmy Carter and Zbigniew Brzezinski and David Rockefeller, like, they got together and then they decided he's going to be president right after Nelson Rockefeller was vice president. So there's a continuity in the 70s of Rockefeller power, and let's not forget directly. Because look, Jimmy who? This is the story.
And to your point, that was Operation Cyclone. That's what Zbigniew Brzezinski's sort of child was, by weaponizing,
Dana Rohrabacher,
another aspect of like a Muslim, Muslim motherhood style jihadist Islamic extremists in the Middle East.
And just real quick, because Jimmy wrote Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid. So chapter 34, with no apologies, the Trilateral Commission is a postmodern Praetorian Guard. David Rockefeller and Zbigniew Brzezinski found Jimmy Carter to be their ideal candidate. They helped him win the nomination and the presidency. To accomplish this purpose, they mobilized the money of Wall Street bankers and intellectual influence of the academic community, which is subservient to the wealth and the great tax-free foundations, and the media controllers represented in the membership of CFR and Trilateral. So this is not conspiracy theory. This is something you could have got at your local library for a nickel late fee, as Goodwill Hunting would say. Right? It's definitely like my copies are used. I have 2 copies of this because this is a gem. I want to make sure this is in a family archive for the next 10 generations. But this tome right here, because we've been talking a lot about 1948, and I have a couple books on 1948, but this book starts in 1948. It is a result of somebody who's in proximity to these plans we're talking about, the British colonization, the giving away of land that wasn't theirs to make 2 parties fight over a long period of time. This was a story brought to Carol Quigley, who was a professor of foreign service at the Edmund A. Walsh Foreign Service School at Georgetown University back in the 1960s. He was. At this point, he could have been working at Princeton or Harvard. He taught all over the place. Carol Quigley, very good historian. So he gets this story in 1948. He gets the story from a whistleblower. The whistleblower's in Cecil Rhodes' Roundtable Group meetings. Here's his plan for the English-speaking world: domination, subverting of America, all these things. He's concerned. He doesn't want to be in the group anymore. And he knows that William T. Stead, who wanted to be in the group because he was the co-conspirator of Rhodes, but later decided he didn't want to be in the group, might not agree with those people. He died in the Titanic. So this character, Alfred Zimmern, who also did the 3rd British Empire lectures at Columbia University in 1926. By the time he gets to 1948, he's not such a big fan of that, and he would like to disclose it. So he tells Carol Quigley, here's the story. Here's the names, the dates, the places, the who, the what, the where, the when, all these things. Quigley's like, that's a crazy story, and it sounds like if I publish that, they would kill me right now. So he's like, I'm going to sit on that story. And he sat on that story until he died, and then it was published posthumously in 1981 as the Anglo-American Establishment. Now, there's a lot of interesting history that happens in between. The reason I brought this book to the table is because I think it provides a lot of insight and solutions, potentially to throw some water on this out of control fire that seems to be burning in this conflict. So let's go to the words of a whistleblower and a story that was too hot for the time, but I think now's the time to actually learn pieces of this story. We're going to go to page 170, and this is from the Anglo-American Establishment by Carol Quigley, published 1981. The Milner Group is the Cecil Rhodes Roundtable Group, and there's a whole chapter in here on the Secret Society of Cecil Rhodes. It's like chapter 3. It's the basic information from which the whole book is built, the whole story, all the names. They're on the plan to get America back into the empire for the purposes of world domination, and there's a great deal of detail we could cover with that, and how they modeled it after the Jesuits, and how Lord Rothschild was involved in the funding, these sort of things. But we're not going to go there right now. We're going to page 170. The general attitude of the Milner Group was neither pro-Arab nor pro-Zionist, although tending, if at all, toward the latter rather than the former. The group were never anti-Semitic, and not a shred of evidence in this direction has ever been found, except that they funded the Nazis. Sorry about that. In fact, Quigley didn't really know about that stuff at that time. In fact, they were very sympathetic to the Jews and to their legitimate aspirations to overcome their fate, but this feeling, it must be confessed, was rather general and remote, and they did not, in their personal lives, have much real contact with Jews or any real appreciation of the finer qualities of those people. Their feeling against anti-Semitism was, on the whole, remote and academic. On the other hand, as with most upper-class English, their feeling for the Arabs was somewhat more personal. Many members of the group had been to Arab countries, found their personal relationships with the Arabs enjoyable, and were attracted to them. However, this attraction to the Arabs never inclined the Milner Group toward that pro-Arab romanticism that was to be found in people like W.S. Blunt or T.E. Lawrence. This is Lawrence of Arabia. He's the one that got them. He's like, hey, if you guys help us out, we're going to give you stuff. And then they reneged on that, right? T.E. Lawrence. The reluctance of the Milner Group to push the Zionist cause in Palestine was based on more academic considerations, chiefly two in number. One, the feeling that it would not be fair to allow the bustling minority of Zionists to come to Palestine and drive the Arabs either out or into inferior economic and social position. And two, the feeling that to do this would have the effect of alienating the Arabs from Western, especially British culture, and that would be especially likely to occur if the Jews obtained control on the Mediterranean coast from Egypt to Syria. Strangely enough, there is little evidence that the Milner Group was activated by strategic or economic considerations at all. Thus, the widely disseminated charges that Britain failed to support Zionism in Palestine because of anti-Semitism or strategic and economic considerations is not supported by any evidence found within the Milner Group. It goes on to the next page, 171. So they're saying they got to make a choice, Tony. It's a tough choice. They're flipping coins. The attitude of the Milner Group toward the Arabs and Jews can be seen from some quotations from the members of the group. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it was the recent production we just viewed that said it wasn't until World War I in which the international policy had changed on behalf of Britain and making sure they still had control of the Suez Canal. Before, it was convenient to have the Ottomans control that because they had an amenable, to Quigley's point, amenable relationship with the Arabs, which is under pretty much Ottoman rule, or Turkish rule. And that, of course, changed because of the allying with the sort of Central Powers that the Ottoman Empire decided to go with. And that created a condition whereby which they actually then decided to flip the script, to your point that you're going to read here. And also you have to remember that the Rothschilds at this point controlled a large portion of the Bank of England by now. So they also had a lot of influence and really sort of bolstering the British state to say, look, we want this, we're ready to fund it, please make this a reality. So a bunch of different unfortunate situations aligned because of World War I.
Yes, which they helped to shape because it was Lord Milner's second war.
Yes.
Look up that book. Lord Milner's second war. World War I was his second war. The first one was the Boer War to set up the apartheid concentration camps in South Africa as like a test colony. Continuing on from page 171.
In 1916, it's like Pico as well.
Yes. That's mentioned in one of the videos tonight because that doesn't get enough mention that they're cutting deals with like 3 different groups.
Yeah, we need to talk about that because And that was 1916. So that was, it talked about the Arabian Peninsula and talked about the specific control that the Ottomans had over the land of Palestine. And that was very key to their interest. Even the Balfour Declaration sort of comes out of the Sykes-Picot, if I remember correctly,
Yes.
at the time. So we'll get into that later.
It's going to interweave more right here. At the Peace Conference of 1919, discussing the relative merits of the Jews and Arabs, Jan Smuts, now he's from South Africa. He set up apartheid like this. This is a colonizer teaching others about colonization. Smuts said, they haven't the Arabs' attractive manners. They do not warm the heart by graceful subjection. They make demands. They are a bitter, recalcitrant little people, and like the Boers, impatient of leadership and ruinously quarrelsome among themselves. They see God in the shape of an oriental potentate. And I thought, man, is that why the Shriners and Masons got those fezzes all over the place? Because it's like a Remember Palestine type thing.
Oh
anyway,
my God.
A few years later.
B'nai B'rith as well.
Yeah, so, the Arabs' good manners derive from desert life, and their love for sports, especially riding and shooting, come close to the heart, right? And they were intermarried, a lot of them. Like the Sassoons were intermarried with the Rothschilds because that was the opium empire in the 1800s. All these sort of good things, right? So they're just like talking about how to parse up other people's land. But now you get down to Lawrence of Arabia. If the Arab belongs to the Mediterranean, as T.E. Lawrence insists, we should do nothing to stop him from getting back to it. These are some of their thoughts. And here's another one that concludes, personally, I don't see the slightest harm in the Jews coming to Palestine under reasonable conditions. They are the Arabs' cousins as much as the Phoenicians. And if Zionism brings capital and labor, which will enable industries to start, it will add to the strength of the larger unit, which someday is going to include Palestine. But they must be content to be part of such a potential unit. They need to have no fear of absorption, for they have everything to gain from an Arab federation. It would mean a far larger field for their activities. So these types of ideas are, and here the whole sections on Palestine and the Milner Group and the manipulation from outside of that area. So continuing on page 172, the attitude of the Milner Group toward the specific problem of Zionism was expressed in explicit terms by Lord Milner himself. Okay, so let me just back up for a second. There are 4 drafts of the Balfour Declaration. There's Lord Rothschild saying, I want this list. Here's a to-do list. It goes to Leo Amory and Lord Milner. Actually, maybe Leo Amory was the whistleblower for this. I'll have to double check. It's one of those. So Milner is involved in the Balfour Declaration. The Cecil Rhodes Roundtable created this whole thing that's going on today on peace in the Middle East. The same people who want to take America and put it back in the empire for the purpose of the world state did the thing that's popping off this week as Hamas versus Israel. Same group of people. So by Lord Milner himself in a speech in the House of Lords on 27 June 1923, long time before Tiny Mustache Man. After expressing his wholehearted agreement with the policy of the British government as revealed in its actions and in its statements, like the Balfour Declaration and the White Paper of 1922, he added, quote, I am not speaking of the policy which is advocated by the extreme Zionists, which is a totally different thing. I believe that we have only to go on steadily with the policy of the Balfour Declaration as we have ourselves interpreted it in order to see great material progress in Palestine and the gradual subsistence of the present Arab agitation, the force of which would be foolish to deny. It goes on. There are about 700,000 people in Palestine, and there is room for several millions. Okay, good point, right? So he looks forward to an Arab federation. This is where they're trying to get. Then he went on to say that he felt Palestine would require a permanent mandate, and under that condition could become a national home for the Jews, could take as many Jewish immigrants as the country could economically support, but must never become a Jewish state. These were the agreements of the people who wrote the Declaration, right? This is important facts to consider on the scale.
He's referring to the Aliyahs,
yeah,
the forced,
this is after the
semi-forced
Aliyah
migration to
yes.
Gaul.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So there's many pages like this. That's why you should read a book like this. We don't have time to go in depth. There could be a whole deep dive on this. If the war keeps going, we're going to have to do stuff like that. What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happen. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions. We can get into the show, we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man. No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man.